Okay, so this week we have getting to know your targets. I won't cover the actual material because we have this video down here for getting to know your targets, so I'm going to let that be. You do have a discussion board post this week. Some of you have already completed it on this chapter 2 discussion board. The big thing that I wanted to demonstrate today was doing the labs. So we'll go through and do the lab. In this case, we'll do the DNS fingerprinting lab. And I'll get rid of this video and we'll replace this video that we're doing here today. So because everything is done through Netlab, all you have to do is click on this link. You'll automatically be logged in. If you're using Netlab for another class and they are not using the Blackboard way of doing things, then if you try to go out to labs directly, you're going to get an error after you log in with my class that you can't come in from an LMS. And if you try to close this and come in again, now you're going to get a different error saying you can only access it from the LMS. So it sets a cookie and it will only allow you to come from the LMS from there on out. You'll want to make sure for your other classes that you go ahead and use an incognito window, and then you can go out to labs and you can log in the normal way. This shouldn't affect anybody that's a grad school student because they should be using this from the LMS and it shouldn't be a big deal. All right, so going back to the reservation, you'll click on Lab 01. And you guys in here are welcome to do this if you want to do the lab at the same time today while we go through it. We're in week 3. And then Lab 01 DNS fingerprinting. All right, so once we're in here, and Sam, you're welcome to follow along there too. We're going to go to new lab reservation, schedule it for yourself. We want to pick any time below the red line. So if you click right below the red line, it'll do it for now. And then go ahead and always give yourself a good 3-4 hours when you make a reservation. You can always extend it, and I'd rather you make more time than what you actually need, specifically because the labs can run a little longer if you're first time run through them. So give yourself plenty of time. We have more than enough pods, so that's no issue. Okay, so somebody already made a reservation on that first pod that I clicked on. So I'm gonna go back. If you get that error, it's the same thing. All you have to do is just pick one of these pods in here. If you need more pods, if you just click this right arrow, you'll see that I've got plenty of pods. There's at least 8 here and I can spit up quite a few more. So feel free to grab whichever one you want and extend it out. Okay, once you're in, you will only see one. You're going to see multiple here because I'm an instructor, but you'll just click on the one reservation that you have and it will fire up a pod for you. Now, as far as grading in these labs, all you have to do is complete the lab. Netlab will know whether or not you did the lab, and it will report a grade back to Blackboard. So you just go through and I'll show you how to walk through a lab here. Okay, so if you've not used Netlab interface before, you have the topology tab up here at the top. This is going to give you the topology of whatever you're currently working on. This will change based on the lab that you're working on. If we click the content tab, this is where you're going to have the PDF document that you will follow along with. A lot of students will want to break this out into a new window so that you can do a side-by-side, which is what I'm going to do now. Okay. You have the status tab that tells you whether or not the virtual machines are powered on, and then each individual virtual machine that you'll be interacting with. If you need to reset a virtual machine or send Control-Alt-Delete, you just click the little down arrow, send Control-Alt-Delete. That's usually the only one you want. If you have multiple monitors, you can always undock these, and then you can have a PC on one monitor, the lab document on another. You could have multiple PCs stretched out, however you want to do it. For the purposes of this lab, I'm just going to split window here with the lab on the left and the other one on the right. I'm going to stretch this over a little bit so that we can zoom in here. All right. So this first lab is DNS footprinting. If you look at the beginning of every lab, it's going to tell you how it maps to the all-in-one CEH chapters and where it meets with the CEH version 10 domains. There is the new CEH version 11, and this will map very similar to the same domains. It also is going to map to the Pen Test Plus exam and also what chapters it's going to map to. So all that great information is at the beginning of the lab. All right. Contents, this is where you can kind of see an overview of the lab. Every lab is going to look the exact same in terms of layout. So once you get familiar with these labs, especially for most of you that have done many Netlab, they're all about the same. You're going to get an introduction as to what's going on, what your objectives are, and you're going to be able to start in. There's also going to be a lab settings. This is going to give you the username and passwords for all the different virtual machines that you need, as well as their IP addressing. All right. So starting off for this one, it wants us to work on the Kali tab. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with these different types of virtual machines, so Kali Linux is a Debian-based Linux machine that is specifically tailored by offensive security to be a penetration testing distro. So all the cool tools and everything we'll use in this class are all built into Kali. pfSense is a firewall, and this is just a virtual version of it. OpenSUSE or OpenSUSE is going to be another Linux distribution that you'll be using in this scenario. In this case, this is going to be more of the client box in here. So if we look at the topology, this is our client on the network. pfSense is the firewall monitoring traffic. And the Kali Linux box is actually going to sit out here on the WAN. It has a dual connection that allows us to get to the inside as well as the WAN. All right. So on the Kali Linux box, we need to log in. And again, those passwords and such are at the beginning. It's just root and tor, T-O-R, or root backwards. And you'll get a console window. And so there's a couple of things that we're going to do within this terminal icon. If this doesn't pop up, you can always start one. Terminal is this little black window up here at the top. And what we're going to do is review the manual page for NS lookup. So if you're a little bit green when it comes to Linux, or you forgot how to do the Linux refresher and things like that, we'll use the man command and we'll do NS lookup. We'll look through all these different commands. You can use the page up, page down, or the up and down arrows to take a look. Once you're done reading, we'll press Q. All right. So now what we're going to do is actually run the NS lookup command. So we'll do this just to start. And this is going to put us in the interactive mode with NS lookup. NS lookup is a tool that's designed for use with DNS servers. So your goal is to be able to specify an exact server that you want to use. And then you can do DNS queries to figure out what IP addresses those translate to. So in our case, we're going to do the server command, which will tell us what the default server is. And you can see here 192.168.9.1. If we go look at the topology, 9.1 is referring to the pfSense. So pfSense is our DNS server. If we want to specify our own server, for example, server 192.168.0.254, which again, if we look at our topology, notice that this is the inside of the LAN network. So that way we can actually translate off this network link going to this side of the pfSense for lookups. And then from there, we're going to do a DNS query for my lab, which is the name of this network for this lab environment. So we look at mylab.com and we're going to get information back about this. So we're going to find that using this server, which is the one we specified, note that DNS goes across port 53. And we will see that our mylookup.lab translates to 192.168.0.254. In other words, that is the firewall in this scenario. So a DNS record, if you're not familiar with how those work, has multiple different table types or common types. So an A record is going to be a host IP address that translates to an IPv4. Quad A is going to be an IPv6. A C name or a canonical name is going to map to its canonical name, often used to point multiple systems to one IP without having to assign multiple A records to each individual host name. So the DNS lookup will continue retrying the lookup until it finds the right name. MX is your mail exchange servers, and that maps to a domain list of all the different message transfer agents or MTAs. Your name server or NS record is going to be delegated to a DNZ zone that uses given authoritative name servers. We have our PTR or pointer record. This is like the canonical name. However, unlike the CNAME, the DNS lookup processes stop and just the name is returned. So it's just going to look up the name. That's it. None of the extra records that go with it. An SOA record is a start of authority, and this just gives authoritative information about a DNS zone. SRV, or the service location, is generalized service location record. And last but not least is text. Text records are usually used for arbitrary human text that we want to read for keeping records or kind of taking notes on whatever this DNS record is. If you're using those in the real world, a lot of times you may have a text record, like say you're authenticating your domain with Google. They'll ask you to put in a specific text record, and then they will do a query based on your domain. If they find that specific text record with a cipher key or something like that, then they know that you own the domain. So it's used as a way of authenticating your domain. So if I say I own profz.academy, they're going to do a DNS query and say, okay, I'm going to look for this specific text record, put this in your DNS. And if I respond, then I know you own the DNS so that we can inject that text record in. You guys have any questions on DNS? I'm assuming you've worked a little bit with DNS. Have you worked much with DNS? Okay. So again, DNS is domain name system. It's what we use to translate google.com to something else. So if I look on my host PC here, this is outside of the lab environment, and I say ping google.com, it does a DNS query on google.com to get an IP address so that I can ping it, and it translates to 142.251.32.174. If I do an NS lookup and I look at my server, notice this DNS server here is going to be the Fort Hays internal one right now. I could set this to Google, which is quad 8s, and then I can do a lookup. So if I look at google.com, we'll see that I return both an IPv6 and an IPv4 address. If I want specific types of DNS records back, I have to set the type. So if we go back to our lab environment and we set type equal to NS, that means we're going to return the name server records. And notice that we get this name server record here telling us what our name server is for mylab.com. So again, in this output, in this case, it's going to be 192.168.0.254. If you were doing this on a public domain, the server would typically return a name server different from the server that you're using for lookups, right? We're in our own actual section. So for example, if I come out here and do a search on profz.academy, we'll see that this particular name lookup, here, let's do it that way, set type equals NS. Now we do profz.academy. And we can see that my domain name servers for this particular domain is from DNS1 and DNS2 at registrarservers.com. All right. We're going to go through a couple other records to see what else we can find. So we can look for A records. Those are the most common ones that you use with DNS. So set type equals A. And then we're going to do a host name. So we want to get the IP address of the OpenSUSE machine, assuming that OpenSUSE.com, OpenSUSE.mylab, because that's the domain that we're working with, .com. And notice that it's returning an IP address for us, 192.168.0.30. That is the IP address that comes back from the domain for this machine. If we wanted to look at mail exchange servers, we would set type to MX, and we would also look at this domain and find out that in this case, there are no MX records within this DNS server. So this particular domain does not have MX records set. However, doesn't necessarily mean they're set. What we'll actually find out in this case is that there is an MX record, but it will not respond all the time. So when you do DNS queries to a DNS server, it's programmed to either respond with what they want to respond with. So if I query and I want it to respond with an A record, it's just going to do that. If I want to block my mail servers from being requested, then I won't return that result back to the user. And that may be a way of protecting the domain. In this case, notice that we got a can't find it because there's no answer. That means that the server does not want to respond. Now, if we set type to any, this is going to return any record back that it can get. And notice we're going to get a bunch of records here. Now, typically and instinctively, you may want to use the type any and just get everything back. But newer DNS servers do not return everything for the zone. And so while it's good at getting some information, you can see not all the hosts or all the A records are on that domain. You can try this particular type. So if you have a poorly managed DNS server, it may return more information than it's supposed to. Like this one in this case will actually return everything back. You just have to specifically ask for any. And if you really want to see everything, then you want to use a transfer record. So if you set type equal to AXFR and now do a mylab.com, in this case, we're going to get transfer failed because we have it set up in the domain so that it's not going to give us a transfer record. You really don't want transfer records out and about because that's going to dump your entire domain, basically configuration, and give it to the user so that they could transfer it from one domain name server to another. We can trick them to say, hey, yeah, give us that transfer record if we were authenticated. In this case, we're getting refused so that the DNS isn't going to give it to us. However, if we go and look on the inside, remember Kali Linux is on the outside of our topology, right? We go back and look, Kali Linux is here. We're actually just using this link to access everything. If we use an inside server such as OpenSUSE, if I can get clicked in here, OS boxes. Yes, yep. In this case, pfSense is the DNS server. So in OpenSUSE, in order to get a terminal, we have to use the quote console. So in Kali Linux, we call it terminal. You can see that here. This is the terminal. In OpenSUSE, we're going to call it console with a K. And so we come in here. We can also pull up this terminal. And if we do an NS lookup, that puts us into interactive mode. We can set type equal to AXFR and mylab.com. Notice that we get a ton of information inside of here. So now it's going to dump not only the mail records, it's going to dump every A record in the system. So now we know the A records for OpenSUSE, pfSense, Security Onion, anything in this system is available. We can also see all the text records inside of here. There's a bunch of information inside of there. We can also see the SOA. So if we come down here and look at this SOA, which is going to tell us how long this DNS record is valid for. So one, we have a serial number. We have a refresh of how many seconds it's going to be till this DNS refreshes, retries, and how long this takes to expire, and the minimum it's going to traverse. So lots of information on a transfer record. The only reason I can get this is because I'm on the inside network. So the way the DNS server is configured, it will respond to you being on a local IP address. It will not respond to somebody that's out on the outside world, which is typical. All right, we'll exit out of this. That'll dump us back to the boxes. We're also going to take a look at the dig command. So dig is very similar to NS lookup. It's just another command that you can use as a tool. We're going to do this from the inside. So we're going to use the OpenSUSE box. If we dig at 192.168.0.254, remember that was the DNS server we set. We're going to look up mylab.com and we want the name server records. And you can see that we're going to get that query back in the user. So in this case, in order to run this command, we have the command and we have the different arguments in order to run that command. Now, if we wanted the name server equivalent, or I'm sorry, the NS lookup equivalent of this dig command we did, it would look like this. It would be NS lookup dash type equals NS. Notice that we're not using interactive mode this time. We're going to set it at the command line. We're going to use the debug command for the mylab.com domain, and we want to use the server 192.168.0.254. And notice the information that we get back from dig is similar to the information we get back from NS lookup. So multiple ways to skin the cat, so to speak. Dig is not installed on Windows systems by default, but NS lookup is. So DNS footprinting, this comes back into getting to know your targets, right? That's what this whole section's about. And so the idea is that you want to do as much research on the target that you're going after. So say this company that we're working on, our lab environment, is mylab.com. We want to get back all the DNS information we can, because if in this case, we were able to get decent information back on the Kali Linux box, we could confirm what the DNS server is, the different type of records that we could authenticate, etc. But if we could find a way to the inside system in some way, then we found out through the transfer record everything that's in that DNS entry. So now all of a sudden, without even somebody telling us all the PCs that are on the network, we're able to know, oh, there's an OpenSUSE box, a pfSense box, a Security Onion box. They have these text records. They also have a Windows system and all their IP address information. And that's simply done with just using DNS and not doing any massive scanning or querying or anything goofy that would throw up red alarms. Nobody's going to think twice about a DNS request. That's the purpose of the DNS request. So let's see here. Guys that are online, Dustin, Sam, you guys have any questions? Were you talking there, Sam? What'd I do? Lose audio?
Yep, I just said no questions.
There you are.
No, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I just said no questions.
Okay. So that's kind of how the labs work. At this point, you're at the end of the lab. You just go up to reservation and you can end your reservation. If you start to run out of time, you're going to get a red alert over here that says you have 15 minutes remaining. You could go to reservation and request more time. As long as nobody made a reservation after you, you will get an extra 30 minutes. And you can do that up to 8 times, as long as nobody's scheduled after you. It's magic. That's what I'm going to say. It knows based on the amount of time that you spend in the lab and what you did in the lab and you're interacting with the virtual machines. That's how the score is derived. So kind of, yeah. So once I'm done there, now if I went back to my Blackboard section from the original loadout, so I'm going to close this breakout and come over here. I can go back to my Blackboard section. If I come back to redo this lab, which you're welcome to do the labs multiple times. If I go to lab 01, you'll notice that I now have a lab history. And so you can check yourself to see whether or not you did that lab. So if you don't remember if you did it, 1, you won't have a score in the grade book, but 2, you can check down here on lab history and figure out whether or not you did the lab. And you're welcome to do these labs as many times as you want. I believe the way the grade book is supposed to work, it's supposed to just take in the first grade that you do. But if we start to run into issues where it's using the last one, so say you just did a reservation, you want to go check something and ended, and it changed your score in the grade book, I will fix that. Just email me. No lab reports, nothing like that. I got rid of that this year because of the sheer quantity of labs. So right now, like this week, there's only 1 lab. But there's some weeks you guys will have 8 labs kind of thing. So it'll get much more in depth in some of these other sections. And so I forego the lab report because you guys are going to get more labs. And Netlab will quasi tell me whether or not you did the lab or not. I say quasi because technically under the hood. Yeah, so each lab is worth 10 points. And so if you attend the lab, you're definitely going to get the 8 points. And then as long as you participated and actually went within the lab and read the document and all that, you should get the other 2 points out of there. Yes, please. Yep. Yeah, go ahead and post in the discussion board for this week. Do this lab. Again, this video is going to go away, so I'm going to actually delete it now. And I will post the video that we just recorded here today, because that one's going to talk about the lab documents and all that. We're not doing lab documents this year. Any of you online guys have any questions?
I'm thinking after the lab, I would just write the process just to repeat the whole thing in PowerShell. Do you care if I post that on a discussion board or?
No, not at all. So let's go out here to discussion boards and let's create a new forum. So there'll be an extra resources section, and I believe we won't do any grading in this form, so it'll just be optional, and you should be able to edit and do anything like that. Yeah, so Sam, at the risk of calling you out here, if anybody doesn't know Sam, Sam's really sharp in Power CLI and PowerShell and use, I'm sorry, not Power CLI, PowerShell. And writes a bunch of different scripts out for the community that you guys probably pull in for your own work. So he may have additional scripts and materials, and I appreciate it, Sam. You're more than welcome to shove that into the forum there.
Sure.
You would see that in the grade center. So if you come to your grade book, you will see that. Right now, I haven't graded these two. I'll go in and fill those in tonight. If you haven't submitted them, please submit them. And I'll fix this grade book too, because it looks like it got all messed up in the import. So I'll fix that tonight. The big thing I'm looking on the discussion board is whether or not you did it. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. 1 and 2. I just need to go back and grade them tonight. Yeah. 1 was the first one, and then chapter 2 is the one for this week. Some people did them ahead of time. That's fine. Yep. Because we had some students that hadn't got in and done some things yet, I kind of held off on grading. But here on out, for the most part, everything is auto graded by Netlab. There's really no more discussion boards. It's really just you guys doing discussion boards at this point, or labs at this point from here on. Oh yeah. Yeah. You can go back and do those anytime. So like here, it looks like I need to get chapter 1 and chapter 2 from you. And you're welcome to do those anytime. No big deal. Yep. I'm not going to be a stickler on due dates in here. I know everything's due at Sunday at midnight. That's just to keep you from falling way too far behind. That's all I'm really caring about. So same way with labs. Again, there'll be some weeks there's 8 labs to do, and that's a lot of stuff to get through. I'm not going to be harping on you to be done by Sunday at midnight. The next week, you may have 1 or 2 labs. Like this week is just 1 lab. So I'm going to try to release these sections on time. There's really no way to expose that. And the reason I want to do these on time is there's things I'm changing week to week from last year's session. There's new labs that I added in, and so I want to preview them and do that kind of stuff. But don't worry about ever quote falling behind. That's especially with the 2 breaks that we have, right? We have Christmas break and fall break, and then you'll have an extra week that I have built into the schedule as a break to catch up on labs and all that. So you'll have way more time than what's listed here. Right around Thanksgiving. Yep. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording.